world changed overnight. And I really don't say that lightly. I'm not trying to be dramatic here to grab your attention.
Right.
We are looking at a convergence of events right now that feels, honestly, like the season finale of reality itself.
Yeah.
Except there's no script, there's no director yelling cut, and the stakes are quite literally life and death for potentially millions of people.
It is a very precarious moment.
Exactly. We aren't just looking at another standard news cycle. This isn't just politics as usual. What we have on our hands is a full-blown constitutional crisis in the UK with a senior royal and handcuffs. We have a Supreme Court rebuke in the U.S. that effectively cripples the president's entire economic agenda. And, perhaps most terrifyingly, we're looking at a 10-day countdown to what could realistically be the biggest global war since 1945.
It feels like absolute chaos, doesn't it? Like the wheels are just completely coming off the wagon.
Yeah.
But if you stop looking at the flashing red lights of the headlines, the things they want you to look at, and start examining the structural integrity of the system itself, the real story isn't the noise.
No, the real story is much deeper.
The real story is the collapse of the old guard. You have the arrest of a royal and the blocking of a president's core economic agenda happening simultaneously. These aren't random, isolated incidents. These are symptoms of a system that is literally eating itself alive. And historically, if you look back at the Roman Empire, the British Empire, any major power structure, when empires start eating themselves, they usually try to start a new war to save face.
To project strength outward when they're weak inward?
Precisely. They look for an external enemy to unify the internal fracture. It's the oldest trick in the geopolitical playbook.
And we actually have a date for that potential war. We have a specific hard ultimatum given by President Trump, 10 days.
On a 10-day clock.
We also have a specific charge against Prince Andrew misconduct in public office, which is a massive detail everyone is missing. And we have an exact, very surprising vote count in the Supreme Court tariff ruling 6-3. Okay, let's unpack all of this. Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Saturday, February 21st, 2026.
And the mission today is very clear. We aren't just reading the ticker tape for you. We aren't engaging in the usual partisan punditry. We are dissecting the Trump ultimatum to Iran, the Epstein fallout finally breaching the walls of Buckingham Palace, and the Supreme Court's stunning blow to the White House. We're going to connect these dots to show you the picture that absolutely no one else is talking about.
So let's start with the big one, the immediate existential threat. The clock is ticking right now. President Trump has issued a strict 10-day ultimatum to Tehran.
Right.
This came out of what the administration is officially calling the Board of Peace meeting, which, I have to say, is a fascinating, almost literary name for a meeting that ends with a highly credible threat of massive kinetic action.
Well, Board of Peace does have a certain Orwellian ring to it, doesn't it?
It really does.
It sounds straight out of the Ministry of Love from 1984. But let's look at the hard data coming out of this, because the political rhetoric is one thing, but the facts on the ground are another entirely. According to analysis by Alistair Crook,
and he's a fantastic resource for this.
He is. A man who spent decades in MI6. He has his ear to the ground on diplomatic cables like very few others. According to him, this isn't a suggestion. It is a hard, inflexible 10-day deadline. Trump's exact words regarding the Iranians were, and I quote, "They must make a deal, or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't."
Bad things will happen. That is classic Trump vagueness. But the military movement we are seeing suggests he's actually very specific about what those bad things entail.
Highly specific.
Now, the official line we're hearing, the narrative being pushed by the administration and echoed by basically all the mainstream press, is that negotiations are happening in Geneva right now. You have Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner representing the U.S. side.
Right, the envoys.
And the demand is ostensibly about nuclear security. They want zero enrichment. That's the headline everyone is running with.
That's the official line. That's what's on the press release. But this is where we really have to dig deeper. If you look at the reporting coming directly from the Iranian side, specifically from Foreign Minister Arachi, he stated in an interview that the U.S. side did not actually ask for zero enrichment during the talks.
Hey, hold on. Let me make sure I have this right. So the public demand, the thing they are shouting about on cable news to rally support, is zero enrichment.
Yes.
But behind closed doors, in the actual negotiation room in Geneva, they aren't even asking for it.
Exactly. They didn't ask for it. And that discrepancy is everything. That suggests that the negotiations are, for lack of a better term, pure theater. Putting my analyst hat on for a second, if you aren't making the demands in the room that you are making on television, you aren't actually trying to get a deal.
You're setting it up to fail.
Yeah. You are trying to fail to get a deal so you can justify whatever military action comes next. Larry Johnson, a former CIA analyst who really understands how these high-level summits work mechanically, described the Witkoff and Kushner negotiation style in Geneva as hot racking on a submarine.
Hot racking. I love that visual. But for anyone listening who hasn't served in the Navy or lived on a sub, can you break that down? That's when one sailor sleeps in a bunk while the other's on duty because there literally aren't enough beds, right?
Right. It implies a state of chaotic rotation, a lack of resources, a severe lack of stability. Johnson paints this incredibly vivid picture of them just running between rooms, talking to the Russians in one suite, then running down the hall to the Ukrainians, then running to an Omani intermediary to pass a message to the Iranians.
They weren't even in the same room as the Iranian delegation.
No. It's chaotic. It's unprofessional. It is definitely not how you negotiate a complex nuclear treaty. It reinforces the idea that this is diplomatic theater designed entirely to run out the clock. So the administration can say to the public, well, look, we tried diplomacy, but they just wouldn't listen.
So if the nuclear issue is a smokescreen, if it's just the public pretext for war, what is the real driver here? You mentioned the phrase merchants of death earlier when we were prepping for this deep dive. What does that refer to?
That's a phrase used by Daniel Davis in his recent, very detailed reporting on this. He's pointing to the immense pressure coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Reportedly, Netanyahu told Trump back on December 28 at Mar-a-Lago, so we're going back a few months of the transition period here, that the nuclear issue is actually secondary.
Secondary to what?
The real targets, the actual red lines for Israel, are ballistic missiles and proxies.
Ballistic missiles and proxies. So this is really about disarming Hezbollah, disarming Hamas, and stripping away Iran's ability to fire back.
Precisely. Alistair Crook makes a brilliant point here that we need to highlight. He says Netanyahu warned Trump that if he accepts a fudged nuclear deal, something that just kicks the can down the road like the JCPOA did, Israel will not endorse it.
They won't give it their blessing.
They will deny it the kosher certificate, to use Crook's exact term. They want the missiles gone because Iran has built what Crook calls a missile umbrella over the entire region. That umbrella deters Israeli kinetic action. They need to puncture that umbrella.
Let's talk about puncturing that umbrella, because the U.S. isn't just sending negotiators to Geneva. They are sending serious hardware to the Gulf, massive amounts of hardware. We're seeing the greatest accumulation of American air power in the region since the 2003 Iraq invasion.
It's a massive deployment.
We're talking about 7 squadrons of F-35s. If you do the math, that's approximately 168 highly advanced aircraft, plus the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford. It looks like an unstoppable armada.
Well, it certainly sounds impressive on paper. It looks great in the B-roll footage they feed to the networks. Shock and awe, right? But here is where the technical realities crash headfirst into the political narrative. We have reports highlighted extensively by Larry Johnson that the Ford has been at sea for 8 months.
8 months. That's an incredibly long deployment.
It is an exhaustingly long deployment for a modern carrier strike group. The ship is tired, the crew is exhausted, and there are internal mechanical issues popping up, specifically unglamorous things like the sewage systems failing.
The sewage systems on a multi-billion-dollar carrier.
Yes. Remember, it's a floating city, and cities break down when they are overtaxed. If you have sewage backing up into the berthing areas, if you have essential life support systems going offline, morale plummets and operational efficiency drops significantly. You absolutely do not want to start a major theater war with a tired, broken ship.
And what about the F-35s? Because I saw a report about gallium shortages. Can we break that down for the audience? Why does a metal shortage matter for a 5th-generation jet fighter?
This is a fascinating detail, and honestly, it's terrifying if you're a pilot being sent into this theater. Gallium is an essential component for the ASA radars, that's active electronically scanned array radars. These are essentially the eyes of the F-35.
The thing that makes it so deadly.
Exactly. Without gallium nitride semiconductors, you simply do not have that cutting-edge detection and targeting capability. There are credible reports that due to global supply chain issues, specifically China withholding gallium exports to the West, some of the newer F-35 models coming off the assembly line don't actually have the advanced ASA radars installed in their nose cones.
Wait, so what do they have in there instead?
They are allegedly flying with gem weights.
Gem weights.
Ballast, just dead weight. It's designed to mimic the physical mass of the radar so the plane's center of gravity remains stable for flight dynamics, but functionally, in terms of combat capability, it's a brick.
You're telling me we are deploying $100 million stealth fighters that might be flying around with metal weights instead of radars because we can't get the raw materials from China?
That is the specific allegation currently circulating in defense logistics circles. And even if they do have the radars, there's the massive issue of maintenance. You can't just fly an F-35 sortie, land, refuel, and immediately go back up like you could with an older F-16 or an F-18.
These are the stealth materials, right?
Right. The stealth coating the radar absorbent material degrades rapidly under stress. The advanced electronics overheat. They require hours and hours of specialized maintenance for every single hour of flight time. Larry Johnson asks a very critical question here. Did the Pentagon deploy 7 maintenance squadrons to go with those 7 fighter squadrons?
I'm guessing the answer is no.
Because if not, after the first wave of strikes, those birds are grounded. They become very expensive, very highly engineered paperweights sitting on the tarmac.
And while we're talking about logistical limitations, let's talk about the ammunition. The destroyers guarding the carrier, they have vertical launch systems, the VLS cells. These are the tubes that hold the Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Right. And a destroyer isn't a video game. It does not have an infinite cheat code for ammo.
Once they fire those Tomahawks, they can't just reload at sea, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just assume they open a hatch, pull another missile out of the hold, and load it up.
That is a very common misconception. You absolutely cannot reload VLS cells at sea. The missiles are far too heavy, the cranes are too delicate, and the sea state is too rough. You need a specialized crane and a secure, totally calm port facility.
And where do they go to do that? If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, which Iran has explicitly threatened to do immediately upon the outbreak of hostilities, they can't go to Bahrain. So where do they go?
They have to go to Diego Garcia.
And Diego Garcia is?
Yeah.
Where exactly?
It is a tiny British-controlled atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Geographically, that is 3 to 4 days of steaming away from the Persian Gulf. So let's just do the math on this operational tempo. You fire your volley of missiles on day 1. You spend day 2, 3, 4, and 5 steaming all the way down to Diego Garcia. You spend day 6 carefully reloading the cells. Then you spend day 7, 8, 9, and 10 steaming all the way back to the combat zone. Your multi-billion-dollar warship is essentially a floating spectator for 10 days out of the fight.
That does not sound like a recipe for a quick war. Trump has made it clear he's hoping for a 10 to 15-day operation. Get in, do punitive strikes, get out.
A quick war is the ultimate oxymoron in the Middle East. It never, ever happens, and the analysts inside the White House know this perfectly well. Larry Johnson mentioned a briefing where the White House was told to anticipate up to 10,000 American casualties if a full ground and air war erupts.
10,000. We have to pause on that number. That is more American casualties than 20 years of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan combined.
Yes, and it could happen in a matter of weeks. And that terrifying reality brings us to the strategic trap of this whole scenario. We aren't just fighting Iran in a vacuum. We have to look at the entire geopolitical chessboard here.
You're talking about the alliances?
On January 29, Iran, Russia, and China formally signed a trilateral security agreement. This isn't a shadow proxy war anymore. It's a formalized coalition war.
We've seen concrete evidence of this out on the water. The Chinese intercept vessel Ocean 1 is currently stationed off the coast. Alistair Crook describes this vessel as essentially a floating AWACS. For the listener, AWACS stands for Airborne Warning and Control System. It's usually a large plane with a radome on top, but here we are talking about a massive ship. What is its exact function in this context?
It's a complete game changer for the region, and AWACS manages the entire theater of battle. It sees absolutely everything: friendlies, enemies, incoming missiles, stealth aircraft. The Ocean One isn't just sitting there passively watching, it is actively mapping the battle space. It can likely track U.S. stealth movements.
Which negates the F-35's primary advantage.
Precisely. But more importantly, it can feed that incredibly dense targeting data directly to Tehran. Crick mentions that China has allegedly provided Iran with direct access to military-grade satellite links for real-time targeting.
That's the sensor-to-shooter loop. That's the holy grail of modern warfare.
Exactly. In the past, the U.S. could just jam GPS signals or spoof them to confuse incoming Iranian missiles, making them miss their targets. But this is a secure, direct, hard-coded link. If Iran has real-time satellite data fed from China, their missiles aren't just guessing based on old coordinates.
They are precision instruments.
They know exactly where the carriers are at this very second. They know where the destroyers are maneuvering.
And we have seen this movie before, haven't we? Let's look back at the 12-day war in June 2025. The narrative in the West, blasted across every screen, was that we shot down everything, that the Iron Dome and the U.S. Navy were totally invincible, but the actual hard data tells a very different story.
Right. Ted Postal, he's a renowned expert on missile technology. He's the physicist from MIT who famously debunked the Patriot missile success rates back during the Gulf War.
He knows his stuff.
He really does. He crunched the raw numbers on that 2025 exchange. Now, Western media claimed a 90% interception rate by combined U.S. and Israeli air defenses. Postal argues, backed by telemetry data, that the reality was likely the exact inverse.
The inverse.
Yes, that Iranian missile penetration rates were near 95%.
95%. That is a staggering, terrifying difference.
Yeah.
If 95% of incoming ballistic missiles actually get through the defense net, our regional bases are just sitting ducks.
They are completely exposed. We have massive bases in Qatar, in Bahrain, in the UAE. And Iran has what they call missile cities. These aren't just concrete silos sitting in a field that you can easily bomb from 30,000 feet.
What are they?
These are vast, deeply buried underground complexes carved directly into mountains, complete with internal roads, logistics hubs, barracks, and mobile erector launchers. They literally drive a launcher out of a tunnel, fire the missile, and drive it back inside under hundreds of feet of solid rock before a U.S. counterstrike can even arrive.
So a decapitation strike is impossible.
You cannot decapitate that kind of infrastructure with an air campaign. To neutralize that threat, you would need a full-scale ground invasion of a highly mountainous country that is roughly the size of Alaska.
So, to summarize this first section for you, we have a military rushing headlong toward a conflict with an arbitrary 10-day deadline, facing an adversary that is deeply dug in, directly backed by two major superpowers, and possessing a highly advanced kill chain that we very likely might not be able to break.
It is a recipe for an absolute catastrophe.
And that's just the foreign policy front. Now, we have to look at what's happening in London, because as we promised at the top of the show, these stories are deeply connected. The rot at the very top of the global geopolitical order is being exposed on multiple fronts simultaneously. While the U.S. is flexing its military muscle abroad, the U.K. establishment is literally collapsing at home.
Let's pivot to that. Because while the war drums are beating loudly in the Gulf, the long silence was finally broken at Sandringham.
Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, arrested on his 66th birthday. You literally cannot write a better script. It sounds like pure fiction.
It's positively Shakespearean, the timing, the location, but notice the specific charge. This is crucial. The official police statement specified he was arrested for misconduct in public office.
Right. I think everyone following this saga expected something related to the sex trafficking allegations directly, or maybe some sort of sweeping civil suit. But this is a very technical, official government charge. Why take this specific route?
It's the Al Capone strategy.
Explain that.
They got Al Capone on tax evasion because they couldn't make the murder and racketeering charges stick, mostly due to massive witness intimidation. Here, the misconduct in public office charge relates very specifically to his time serving as the UK trade envoy.
We have some incredible reporting from James Longman that sheds a lot of light on this. It pertains to specific emails found in the massive trove of DOJ files, where Andrew, acting in his official governmental capacity, forwarded highly confidential trade secrets regarding Singapore, Hong Kong, and China directly to Jeffrey Epstein.
And look at the dates on those emails.
Right.
These emails are from around 2010.
2010, that is a massive chronological detail.
Extremely significant, because that is well after Epstein's first conviction in Florida back in 2008. The entire "I didn't know he was a convicted criminal" defense completely evaporates with that timestamp. Andrew wasn't just casually hanging out with a bad influence. He was actively feeding state secrets, deep economic data. Delicate trade negotiation points to a man who was clearly running a sophisticated intelligence operation.
Intelligence operation. That's the key phrase we need to focus on. Whitney Webb has been meticulously reporting on this angle for years. The prevailing theory, backed by a lot of circumstantial evidence, is that the Epstein network wasn't just some debauched billionaire party ring. It was a highly organized honey trap operation.
Linked directly to intelligence services.
Right. Specifically Mossad and the Mega Group, according to some very rigorous analysts. And it was designed to gather dirt on the global elite.
Exactly. Compromise. Pure blackmail. The mechanics are simple. You get them on tape doing terrible, illegal things, and then you own them. You own their parliamentary votes, you own their corporate policies, you own their global influence. And this arrest of a sitting royal suggests that the massive firewall that has historically protected the monarchy has finally been breached.
You really have to wonder, why now? After all these years, why pull the trigger on this arrest today? Is it a calculated distraction from the impending war in the Middle East? Or is the system just so fractured and weak that they can no longer protect their own highest-ranking members?
I think it's the latter. And speaking of the elite failing to protect their own, let's talk about Les Wexner, the billionaire magnate behind Victoria's Secret and The Limited. He was recently deposed in Ohio, and his legal defense was, well, it was interesting, to say the least.
He claims he was conned and duped by Epstein.
Duped. Look, you don't build a massive global retail empire by being easily duped by a guy who just wandered into your office. And you certainly do not give a virtual stranger power of attorney over your entire multi-billion-dollar fortune just because you were duped.
Explain the power of attorney aspect, because to the average listener, that might just sound like a standard legal formality your accountant has.
Oh no, it is handing over the literal keys to the kingdom. It allowed Epstein to hire people, fire people, buy massive properties, sell assets, and move astronomical sums of money without ever having to check in with Wexner. It gave him total, unquestioned financial control.
Which is insane for a billionaire to do.
You only give that level of control to someone for two possible reasons. Total, implicit trust in a lifelong business partner, or because you are being heavily coerced. We are talking about nearly $1 billion that was transferred or directly managed by Epstein. That isn't a simple con. That is a deep partnership, or it's an ongoing extortion payout.
And the political reaction, or lack thereof, is incredibly telling. We noted in our research that Republican Congress members were conspicuously absent from that deposition in Ohio.
Which immediately raises the question of political protection. Who is protecting whom in this web? And this brings us right back to Trump. He was asked by reporters about Prince Andrew while he was over in London, and his response was, "I don't know Prince Andrew. It's a tough story."
I don't know him. But we literally have they are public record. Mar-a-Lago, the year 2000, Trump, Melania, Prince Andrew, and Jeffrey Epstein all standing together, smiling in the same frame. They clearly partied together.
Plausible deniability is the standard operating procedure for these people. But as Whitney Webb points out of her analysis, the infamous Black Book and the massive tranches of files finally being released by the DOJ are becoming a weaponized tool.
It's not just about justice for the victims anymore, sadly.
No, it's about raw political leverage. Who is on that list? Who gets exposed to the media? And who gets protected by the DOJ? The Epstein Truth Commission that was recently established by the New Mexico legislature is desperately trying to preserve physical crime scene evidence at the Zorro Ranch.
Because there are powerful forces actively trying to bury it.
Exactly. They're trying to bulldoze the evidence before the commission can map it.
It feels like the global elites are engaged in this frantic game of musical chairs. But instead of fighting for chairs, they are viciously fighting for the last lifeboats on the Titanic.
That's a very apt metaphor.
And speaking of sinking ships, let's look at the domestic economic front. Because while Trump is threatening to start a massive war in the Gulf, his core economic legs just got completely cut out from under him here at home.
This is a truly massive blow to his administration. The Supreme Court ruled, in a 6-3 decision, that Trump's invocation of emergency powers to enact sweeping global tariffs fundamentally violated the law.
6-3. We need to pause on that ratio. That means even conservative justices, people he likely appointed, broke rank and voted against him.
It sends a massive signal that the institutional check on executive power is still active. The judiciary is firmly saying, you are not a king. You cannot just declare a national emergency on a whim to unilaterally rewrite American tax law. But the practical implications of this ruling are absolutely chaotic.
How so?
Well, the federal government may now legally owe billions in refunds to all the businesses that paid those illegal tariffs over the last year.
Billions in refunds.
Yeah.
The Treasury certainly doesn't have that kind of cash just lying around in a vault. We are already running a massive national deficit.
Exactly. It's a fiscal nightmare. And strategically, this completely cripples his economic nationalism agenda. If he can't use unilateral tariffs as a bludgeon in trade negotiations, he looks incredibly weak on the global stage. And history tells us, when a populist leader looks weak and boxed in at home, what do they usually do?
They look for a fight abroad.
They look for a distraction.
So you genuinely think the SCOTUS ruling makes this Middle Eastern war scenario more likely?
I think it dramatically accelerates the desperation inside the Oval Office. If the domestic economy is stalling out and the conservative courts are actively blocking your policies, a unifying war becomes the only viable political card left to play to rally your base before an election. It's a classic distraction mechanism.
But the broader economic war is already being lost.
Yeah.
We have to talk about what China is doing in the background while everyone is focused on Iran. Alistair Crook highlighted a very quiet but incredibly dangerous directive sent out to Chinese banks recently. Stop buying U.S. treasuries immediately and start actively disinvesting.
This is the silent war. This is deep financial warfare. For decades, the global economic engine worked because China recycled its massive trade surplus back into U.S. debt, which kept our domestic interest rates artificially low.
They bought our bonds, we bought their cheap goods.
Right. Now, they are systematically stopping that cycle. And they aren't just stopping, they are actively migrating to the digital RMB.
The digital renminbi. How does a digital currency actually change the geopolitical game here?
Because they are offering to pay high interest yields on digital currency holdings to aggressively attract global capital, they are effectively building a parallel, sanction-proof financial system that completely bypasses the U.S. dollar.
So if China aggressively dumps their U.S. treasuries, while the U.S. is simultaneously trying to fund a massive new kinetic war in the Middle East, there is literally no one left to buy our debt.
Basic supply and demand. If no one buys the debt, the U.S. Treasury has to offer exponentially higher interest rates to attract any buyers at all.
And if Treasury interest rates skyrocket, the U.S. housing market crashes because mortgages become too expensive, auto loans become unaffordable, and the basic interest service on the existing national debt eats up the entire federal budget.
Inflation returns with an absolute vengeance. We are talking about the very real potential end of the U.S. dollar's global hegemony.
It's the death of the dollar scenario that economists have been warning about for 20 years. And it ties directly into the momentum we're seeing with the BRICS nations. So is the U.S. rush to war with Iran partially a desperate attempt to secure total energy dominance and stop the BRICS rise?
It has to be a major factor. The economic sanctions against these countries simply aren't working anymore. They've built workarounds. The financial tools of statecraft have failed. So now the establishment reaches for the kinetic tools. But as we discussed in detail earlier, those kinetic tools, the tired carriers, the unmaintained jets, are blunt and possibly completely broken.
And there's one more complex layer of geopolitical maneuvering happening right now that ties this all together. Germany. We have a shocking new report from Der Spiegel regarding the Nord Stream pipeline attack. This is a story that just refuses to die.
This is a fascinating geopolitical pivot. For years, the official Western stance was either total silence or blaming Russia for blowing up their own pipeline. Now, Der Spiegel, which is deeply connected to German intelligence, is openly reporting that the CIA knew about the attack beforehand.
But here is the massive catch. They are now trying to pin the actual operation on General Zaluzny.
Valery Zaluzny, the former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine.
Right. They are framing the biggest act of industrial sabotage in modern history as a rogue element operation.
It's incredibly convenient, isn't it? This narrative perfectly distances the Biden administration, who was in charge at the time, the current Trump administration, and the German chancellery from any direct culpability. It allows them to say to the public, we didn't do it, we didn't authorize it, this rogue Ukrainian general went off the reservation and did it.
It feels like Germany is desperately trying to clean house.
They absolutely are. They are finding a convenient scapegoat so they can potentially begin to normalize relations with Russia, or at the very least politically extricate themselves from the financial black hole of the Ukraine mess as that Eastern Front completely collapses. It's all part of the old guard trying to survive a massive transition of global power.
Okay, let's take a breath and really connect the dots here for you, the listener. We have an exhausted U.S. military that is potentially walking straight into a highly sophisticated technological trap in Iran. We have a political class across the West that is being brutally exposed as deeply compromised by the Epstein files and intelligence honeypots.
Yeah.
And we have a global economic system that is teetering right on the edge of a catastrophic sovereign debt crisis.
It's what I call the samsara of conflict. It's a cyclical wheel of suffering and violence that our leadership simply cannot seem to break out of. The U.S. political leadership has this deeply ingrained cognitive dissonance. They genuinely believe they can win a quick war against Iran because they fundamentally believe the Iranian people will rise up and welcome American troops as liberators.
We see that narrative pushed constantly. There's that highly circulated polling data, which, we should note, was funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, claiming there's an 80% opposition rate to the Iranian government among the populace.
Right. But if you look at the independent, rigorous polling, like the data from the University of Maryland, it suggests the exact opposite reality. It shows that the 2025 missile exchanges actually deeply united the Iranian populace against external threats.
Because nationalism is an incredibly powerful drug.
The most powerful. When you start dropping bombs on a sovereign country, the people rally around the flag, even if they historically despise the government in charge. If we attack Iran, we do not get a neat and tidy regime change. We get a 100-year asymmetric regional war. And what is the ultimate nightmare economic scenario of that?
Iran immediately follows through on their threat to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. And they target the vulnerable Saudi and UAE oil fields with those precision ballistic missiles.
Professor Mohammad Marandi warned specifically about this cascade effect. He stated flatly that it would trigger a global economic depression significantly worse than 1929.
No oil coming out of the Gulf means global logistics freeze overnight. Factories shut down globally. The supply chain halts. And the everyday consumer pays the ultimate price at the pump and the grocery store.
And that reality is absolute political suicide for Trump. We're looking down the barrel of the 2026 midterms. Trump clearly thinks a swift, decisive war win restores his image after the Supreme Court defeat.
But if gas prices hit $10 a gallon and 10,000 flag-draped body bags come home to Dover Air Force Base, the MAD-GA base, which, let's be totally honest about the demographics, is largely anti-interventionist and anti-war, that base will completely implode.
So, given all of this, is it possible that the deep state, the permanent intelligence and military bureaucracy, is actively, intentionally maneuvering him into this unwinnable conflict? Is this an elaborate trap?
It's a very valid analytical theory. Think about it strategically. You use the lure of a war to completely destroy his populist presidency. You simultaneously use the strategic release of the Epstein files to prune the useless liabilities from the establishment, like Prince Andrew.
Sacrificing a few high-profile pawns to save the larger court.
Exactly. It cleans the slate entirely for a new, compliant establishment to seamlessly take over, standing amidst the ashes of the old one.
That is an incredibly chilling thought. We are essentially watching a controlled, systemic demolition of a presidency and perhaps the final stages of an empire.
And the tragic part is, the people caught in the blast radius of this demolition are the tired sailors on those ships, the innocent civilians in Tehran, and the hardworking taxpayers in Ohio paying for it all.
The 10-day clock is ticking right now. The military assets are positioned. The legal walls are rapidly closing in on the old elite. It really feels like we are standing on the beach, just watching the water recede, knowing a massive tsunami is forming on the horizon.
The ultimate truth you need to understand is that the West is locked in a conflict with absolutely no reverse gear. Whether it's the failing economy, the devastating Epstein secrets, or the brewing war in the Middle East, the only strategic move left for the current establishment is to double down on the chaos. They can't go back. They can only go violently through.
And we will be right here to document every step of it for you. If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.